Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Welcome to the Yale Center for British Arts online series, At Home, Artists in Conversation. My name is Phillip Edward Spradley, and I'm delighted to welcome artist Holly Hendry to the program today. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping notes. Please note that this program will be recorded, your camera and sound are muted, and will remain so throughout the program. We will be using the Q&A feature located on your navigation bar to gather your questions for Holly, and they will be answered at the end of the program, but please feel free to submit your questions at any time. If you would like closed captioning, a live transcript is available by clicking the icon on your navigation bar. Yale University acknowledges that Indigenous people, nations, including Mohegan, Massantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill Pagosset, Niantic, Quinnipiac, and other Algonquin-speaking people have stewarded through generations the lands and waterways what is now the state of Connecticut. We honor and respect the enduring relationship that exists between these people and nations and this land. Holly Hendry. Holly Hendry was born in London in 1990. She received her bachelor's in fine arts from the Slade School of Fine Art in 2013, where she is currently a lecturer in sculpture. After her bachelor's, she then went to complete a master's in sculpture at the Royal College of Art in 2016. Holly currently lives in London and maintains a studio in Southeast London. Drawing on the hidden intricacies inside the human body, as well as the complex structures within our society, Holly creates densely layered sculptures that illustrate the complexities of our infrastructure and experiences. Her work deals with internal and external in the terms of body, display, production, revealing what would otherwise be hidden. Architecturally rear spaces and bodily activities or situations that are brought into view using an array of materials, including steel, Jesmonite, charcoal, lipstick, soap, foam, and grit. Holly has been a participant in La Biennale de Lyon, the Liverpool Biennial, and recent Arts Council Collection Survey exhibition, Breaking the Mold, Sculpture by Women Since 1945. Her most recent solo exhibition has been with her represented gallery, Stephen Friedman Gallery in London, the Delaware Pavilion in Bexhill, Southeast England, the Somerset House in London, and the Yorkshire Sculpture Park in West Brighton. Her work is held in the collection of the Arts Council UK, Brack Center Collection France, British Council Collection and Government Art Collection UK. In spring of 2023, her first, hopefully of many, permanent public artworks will be completed at Steam House, Belmont Works Building, commissioned by Eastside Projects in partnership with Birmingham City University, Birmingham, England. Holly, thank you for taking the time to be here today. I have no illusions how busy you are these days with your upcoming outdoor commissions, which is part of your practice we're actually going to be focusing on for our conversation today.
Thank you for that amazingly comprehensive introduction as well, Philip. And no, I'm really excited to be here today. Also, thank you to Yale Centre for British Art for having me. And thank you for everybody else that's helping putting it together, to Jane and Linda for all the extreme organisation that I can only aspire to. And thank you, Philip, because Philip was able to come to my studio recently in real life during jet lag and rainy London, so it feels really special to now be having this conversation.
It was a pleasure, and I hope to make more visits, honestly. So Holly, you've been creating work within the white wall space of art institutions, that being university, gallery, museums, for as long as you've been creating outdoor and public work. And what I've found interesting about this branch of your practice is what emerges are these ideas of what are our cities? How do we live in our cities? How do we participate in public spaces? And then you further that by deepening the question, well, how do we build our cities? How are we built? With whom do we build our cities? And what does it mean to build something collectively together? And I wonder if you can recall, it's a big question, what first intrigued you about bringing your work into an outdoor social area?
That is a big question. It's a good question, though. I think my work kind of brought itself outdoors or into kind of a more social space, or kind of bringing me outdoors with my work, in the way that I think a lot of the work kind of depends on architecture as a kind of framework, or kind of, external spaces as a kind of framework for other happenings. And it's a framework I grapple with. So I think for me, those questions kind of arise from those type of spaces. And so almost the work has to begin in those type of spaces. It feels like it's a kind of requirement. I mean, it's not always a requirement, but it's when that feels most exciting to me in a way. And I feel like I work in white cube spaces as well, but I think some of those times the white cube space seeks to kind of eliminate the distractions that I like to work with. So I think for me, the kind of architecture of surroundings allows me to kind of try and grapple with that, or like approach those questions, think about kind of the way we use spaces, or spaces dictate how we use them, how we kind of navigate ourselves. So in that way, kind of thinking about bodies kind of pollinating and knotting with those surroundings. And so in that way, it feels really kind of integral at times for that to be kind of a real central part of it. I think, and that feels like the starting point. It was kind of a necessity in a way.
Thank you for sharing that. And speaking of starting point, we're going to go way back, one of the earliest works you've made. Now this is set in a private domestic setting because you're in the preliminary stages to experiment filling space. Can you describe what it is that we're looking at here?
Yeah, it feels strange to be talking about these works. I mean, the one with the toilet in, I'm not even sure I considered a work at the time, because it was while I was still doing my undergrad, and I was thinking and feeling and kind of working through a kind of idea about our emotional connection to spaces, a kind of memory of them, how we navigate them, and how we're tied to them. But I was really struggling to figure out how to like realize that physically. I was feeling really weighed down by kind of the idea of like making things in the studio using stuff, which feels weird because stuff is, my language as well. But it wasn't doing the right thing. And I think the space of the art school is so brilliant in so many ways for community and ideas and talking and sharing and making. But I was also kind of trying to find that framework I was speaking about before to make things with, and I couldn't find it in that setting. So the one with the toilet is a weather balloon that I inflated in my partner's university living spaces. And I was filming these kind of inflations. But the very first one is the one in the kitchen, which was done in my grand's kitchen. And it's a still really from a video called 2.5 Minutes of Air.
Appropriately titled.
Yeah, which is self-explanatory really. But it's really important work to me for many reasons, but one of them being because it was kind of when my thinking changed a bit, because I was feeling all those frustrations, and I took this weather balloon. I got a pump for an airbed and attached it to the weather balloon and put it in the cupboard behind and turned it on and started inflating it with the film camera, and kind of watched as it inflated and became this kind of body in a space. There was a hole, there was a kind of element of breathing, there was inflation. It was suddenly, there was tension, it was suddenly kind of dominating the space. And and suddenly then I couldn't turn it off because it was so big. So it was kind of, I had this dialogue with it where it was also in control of me. And I think that resonates in so many of my work today, where kind of scale dictates things that are maybe just beyond my control. So yeah, I watched as it became this kind of body, the skin and kind of air became this material, that I was kind of so frustrated with before. Yeah, and so it was a real starting point for me for thinking about quite literally how to kind of use those spaces as frameworks, but also yeah, like this work now is taking on another kind of meaning, because sadly my grand's no longer around, so it's a space I no longer have access to, and it's something that you kind of feel you know so well, but then now you're not part of. So there's all these things that for me the work addressed and kind of continues to change quite a lot as well.
And this actually leads to another work that involves latex and air, made around the same time, a little later. And this is in a more accessible area than your nan's. It's actually on the University of College London's campus, where it could be discovered and interacted with. This is the old observatory, empty during your time. Now I believe it's a active coffee shop.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. And in 2012, you took over this area that, again, was not being utilized for anything at the time, maybe storage for some gardening tools, but you created this work, Blister. And again, you're working on filling the space of these architectural areas. And to my understanding, there weren't any signs or indicators that this was here, was it?
No, it wasn't there for very long either, a day or so.
But still, this is situated right in the middle of campus where people can come across it and interact with it. And should they be so brave and bounce on it, as I believe this person was in this photo.
Yeah, I think the work, Philip convinced me to show this because it feels so funny to talk about something that happened so long ago and felt very intuitive, but also maybe probably one of my first kind of site-specific works of sorts. But yeah, apart from this photo, I was really interested in the idea of kind of air rendering the floor unusable, but at the same time kind of making yourself very aware of your presence if you were on it. Like it was about creating a membrane between the air around you, or like the air underneath you. But I think I was also thinking about the room itself. I think you mentioned is an observatory. So it used to have a telescope in at some point as well. So I kind of like that. There was this interesting kind of thinking about looking up while concentrating on looking down as well.
Beautiful. I think another good example of you utilizing space with latex as your primary medium at this time is also work that was set on Slade's campus, and it is entitled R255, G145, and B175. And this was made a little later after Blister. It was located in the Slade School of Fine Art, directly adjacent from where Blister was in the old observatory. And it's a very elaborate title. And can you fill us in on what those specific numbers mean that correspond with those letters?
Yeah, so the title, it feels quite mechanical, I think, quite impersonal, which I quite enjoyed because it was so the opposite of the work. But the title is a color code for a very specific tone of pink called Baker Miller pink, which at the time, I think there's a book out about it now, but I don't think that book existed when I was making the work. It would have been useful. I was looking at all these kind of colors of institutional interiors and the effect they have on the physiological body as well. And I came across this color called Baker Miller Pink, which was kind of brought to kind of attention by a scientist called Alexander Schaus, who had been doing these color experiments where he was asking participants of scientific studies to stare at these color codes, and he was monitoring physiological effects, and staring at this kind of color card for, I think it was 5 minutes, has really specific effects on the body, where it lowers heart rate, increases hormone levels. And he went a step further and kind of which relates to its title, and decided managed to convince these 2 prison guards to paint some cells of a prison in this color, to be part of the cycle. It feels quite, I'm not sure if that would be all right now, but so they painted certain prison cells in this color and monitored, and apparently there was no outbreaks of antisocial behavior. But then they did it again and people hated it, and so there was this kind of contentiousness about this color. But then there's other things like people kind of it was brought to attention in some kind of scientific kind of studies and things, and so there was like a football game where
there's a scandal.
Yeah, they painted their opponent's locker room this kind of color and then won the game, and then they weren't allowed to officially win the game because there was so much proof about this color. So I was really interested in the kind of contentiousness of it, but also the fact that something visual has a physical effect in such a specific way. And so yeah, it was loaded with these kind of things that make it really heavily kind of science-based, but there was also something about it for me that was kind of quite absurd and awkward, and it kind of became like this internal space. The sunlight shone through the windows and would make the space kind of glow pink, and I also thought about it being this kind of upside down piece of bubble gum lodged in the space. It was it was very much about air to me, kind of grappling or containing that and jamming it up. So it was almost like you kind of start to imagine the impression of the architecture it's taking, and it started to get kind of it was latex, so it was kind of static, so it became like this body. It started to gather dust and hair from the surrounding as well, so it became this thing that was kind of at once kind of alluring but then also kind of a bit repulsive as well. Latex being kind of having the feel that it's kind of close to skin. So I was interested in the dialogue.
Film quality.
Yeah, exactly. So it was the framework was there to kind of really like, again, think about that idea of tension and it kind of having the potential to burst. I mean, I'm glad it didn't. There was a risk because it had to kind of maintain this kind of internal internal kind of pressure in order to keep that kind of that level of inflatedness. But it was the first thing that I had really done of that scale, and that was really exciting to me. I remember my mum works in the school, and over the Easter holidays, around this kind of time of year, the school was obviously empty, so she managed to convinced the janitor to let us use the school hall to sew it all in. So I took all this latex and one little sewing machine, and was just like sewing meters and meters of latex.
I did not know that. That's brilliant. This was a family project. I had no idea.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where else I would have done it. It was really important.
I also love this particular image. I believe this is when you were deflating it or inflating it. You were able to get in there and actually get the interior view of it being pressed against these windows that outlook campus. And there was also a later slide with the impression here, which I think is very striking. But as you said, this is one of your biggest works at that time. So you're in the studio, you're working with frameworks and edges, and you were also exploring breathing, bodies, and how to address that state of being within objects while dealing with space. And what I always found interesting about this particular work, and the work we're focusing on mainly, is because this is typically located where people are regularly mobilized. Like this is a hallway that people need to go through to get back and forth through Slade. So it's part of their commute, or it's where they regularly sit down and gather. And I think because of this placement of your works, you're able to interact with a serious, engaged spectator because these sculptures are interrupters to their everyday life. People stop in their tracks, they double take, they reroute their thoughts and their motion to interact with these. And I just love that these were university works of you breaking out into shared spaces. And here's that literal image of it like coming out of the windows of the school. And from what I understand and what I've been told, to this day, you're the only student that had completely taken over those spaces to exhibit your work, that being the old observatory and this hallway.
A lot as students use it for their degree shows quite a lot for this this space, but sometimes it's used for stretching canvases as well. But definitely the top half, because it was covered it was covered in duct tape. I really like your description of the work as an interrupter. I think I'd like all my works to be described in that way. Interrupter of spaces.
All right, people, you heard it here first. So shortly afterwards, in 2014, at the Sharjah Foundation, you created this work, Homeostasis. And this involved galvanizing steel pipes snaking around a courtyard, funneling through continuous flow of air. And it was inspired by the bargeels, which are the wind towers of the Middle East. And if you don't mind me saying, this is, in a way, this was a big leap for you in terms of exhibiting. From, you know, RGB to now this massive space and this square footage. Can you talk about that sort of process and where you were at the time, like mentally?
Yeah, I mean, it was the most amazing opportunity, and I really have Hura Al-Qasimi, who runs the Sharjah Art Foundation and the Sharjah Biennale, to thank for that, to have kind of determination and faith and kind of belief in young people just graduating art school to be able to do things outside. Like, yeah, I feel really lucky to have had that opportunity. And I actually met her while I was still a student at the Slade. We have visiting artists as a kind of visiting artist program, and in a tutorial she was speaking about her plans to run a kind of program in between the year of the biennial. So she said, maybe if it goes ahead, you can come to Sharjah. We're going to get students from Egypt and Bahrain and London to come and spend time in Sharjah and then propose some works. And so I wasn't sure if it was going to happen, and there was a kind of on and off period, and then with a few emails, and then before we know it, we were all going to Sharjah and had the amazing kind of opportunity to spend a few weeks there, kind of understanding the city, exploring the city, and kind of learning about the history of how this place exists and how people use it. It was just this amazing place of like kind of it's the proximity to Dubai is very close, but it felt so different as well. I think this year's biennial is called Thinking Historically in the Present, and it feels like that sums up the approach to the Art Foundation and kind of Sharjah itself. They're kind of very much building with a kind of history in mind. And so I became really, interested in these bargeels, these wind towers, as you say, which historically were a kind of center of the home, because they were the form of the coolest point in the building, but are now mainly redundant, really. Lots of them are filled in or kind of decorative. And so I had this ambition to kind of have the building spill its guts, almost have this kind of thing that brought something out, but at the same time talk about the kind of history of it as well, or reignite that kind of draw attention to that part of the building. So yeah, it was important to have these pipes that are just a normal form of air conditioning kind of system, which had a fan running through it, which created this kind of regurgitatory system. that is in a kind of way useless. And we had to work with ducting engineers to kind of fit everything together. And I think on the last day of putting it together, the main engineer was like, it's not going to work. And because I think, and he was just kind of totally perplexed, but really going along with it the whole time, because he was thinking about it as a system. But I love that. I love the kind of uselessness of its usefulness, and it being this thing that then people interact with. And it was there for a year, so it was an amazing opportunity, and one I learned so much from.
I'm sure. And again, I truly appreciate the research that you take on and consider when starting these works. You created, again, as you said, this piece because you were fascinated by the history of these forms and their function. You use the traditional form of the Bargio as the framework. And because of modern air conditioning, the towers are more decorative than utilitarian. So I love this contemporary conversation you're having with a historical site. And I just want to share this lovely behind the scenes image you were kind enough to provide us of this maquette that you had created in order to visualize this larger endeavor of yours. What is the scale of this?
It's like tabletop size. It fitted on my desk. It's made of like little bits of balsa wood. But it was really important for me. I think it was the first time I was properly having to do like architectural drawings that I could communicate with the engineers to then figure out how to put this thing together. And the only way I could think about it is practically as well. So this felt like the most physical form of drawing to me, where I could have it as a tangible felt thing in front of me. And I don't think it's anything new in terms of like, art making. People have been making models for centuries, but it was so important. And that felt like the drawing before the drawing. It felt like a way to think about it and get a sense of its materiality as well.
Do you actually utilize pencil and paper or keep a sketchbook to process ideas, or is it primarily these maquettes that help you with your endeavors?
I think drawing in my work is like loads of different ways. It's like this type of thing. It's like computer drawings on like SketchUp or Illustrator or Rhino, where it's like, and then there's like, but the very first thing is like sketchbook drawings, but they all kind of they don't make sense. They've got like
stick figures, right?
They're like yeah, kind of like, I don't know, like it's almost a way to work things out. Like I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but it's just like not really, it doesn't really relate to drawing. It's not good drawing. I don't know what maybe good drawing doesn't exist, but it's not like I cut bits out of pages and and figure that bits out like that, or I don't know, what's another example, or I start doing kind of notes and then add like those bits, which is you maybe see later. But so there's nothing that's ever official within the drawings, but these tiny little drawings are so important to kind of capture the essence of something that then translates into these models or the computer drawings, which feel like space is kind of in your lap or on your desk a bit more. So I think it's a real kind of mix of all of it at once to try and get the right thing.
Right. And actually, this is a serious layout that essentially took a team to help you make your dream architecture release down. This is your first encounter, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, with something this technical in a way.
Yeah, totally. Well, I have my dad to thank. He's an architect, and so I really lent on his his expertise as well to help me figure out these drawings, which I can now do.
Mr. Hendry.
I can now do myself to an extent, but it was like really key to kind of figure that out. And then you could see the little 3D rendering that I did through learning SketchUp. So those things really help then place it like in space. And I think they're important because there's like a trust there. Like if you draw out the space on SketchUp that's like 20 meters wide, and then you're drawing the pipes to the scale. In the studio, that feels massive, but out in to the scale of the architecture where it's going, it feels bright. So I think I rely on those aspects a lot to have kind of belief and faith in scale.
Here's a lovely image.
That latex is actually from the degree show before, which becomes a thing in my work about kind of reuse or regurgitation.
Constantly reusing and recycling work. And as you're working on these massive sculptures, are you concurrently working on smaller works, or are you solely focused on one sculpture at a time, since they are usually so many elements, honestly?
I'm not very good at multitasking, but so it's
sure, that's not true.
I think it's mainly one at a time, but I think smaller things in the studio become tests or elements that feed into other ideas, or kind of sometimes provide relief, like a practical outpouring or something that's not so reliant on conversations or teams or dialogues, where it can just be something that feels quite kind of true and intimate that happens in the studio, that really does have an effect on the bigger works. But yeah, there isn't such a kind of reliance on other people, so that I think they're equally important.
I think so too. So we're going to step away from outside very quickly, because you've brought this investigation and interest of producing sculpture for outdoor spaces and the intricacies of what lies beneath back into institutional spaces. And we're going to speak on a few. I think you famously have connected these environmental elements and layers with your interest in biology, which can touch on deterioration, fragmentation, the self, and from either a medical perspective or from an archaeological one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the best examples of this is with your exhibition Gut Feeling in 2016. Here we see a plethora of materials being used in a layering or a stacking method. There are metal props, there's rock salts, there's marble chunks, and comically sculptural dog chew bones. There's organic and synthetic interspersed, and the details are exaggerated, and they're beautiful. And I was hoping you can share with our audience your investigation here. What was the process? What are you looking to uncover or highlight with these specific works?
So these works were shown as I was finishing at the Royal College of Art after I was doing my master's, and yeah, they felt like a culmination of basically like 2 years or maybe more of kind of I had been making these big things, and I was thinking a lot about then like the details as well, like where details need to come in or where they don't, or these ideas of compression, extrusion, extraction. And I found it was, yeah, there was like, the Royal College has like all these facilities, and I had spent 2 years testing really, and I didn't know where it was going. And then this work kind of happened very quickly out of thinking about these kind of quite composty ideas of material and excess from your everyday life kind of becoming molten and compressed. I think maybe also as a response to making these bigger works and like being like, what do you do with them? Where do they go? How do you deal with them? And relating to also the stuff we hold on to, where do we go? What happens where we pack stuff up and move? So I was thinking about like the weight of these things. I feel like it's like almost the exact opposite of the idea of air as a material. It's like the lump and stuff that we carry around with us. And so these works came from that. They were made to the dimensions of like things that would be able to slide into the wall of the art school. So you could see the wall to the left there. That's like the same width as that pool work. And so in a way they're kind of site specific to this space. the white bendy frameworks kind of relate to the ceiling joists and things as well. But I was thinking a lot about consumption and the edges. So a lot of my work had this kind of slice to it. And this was the first time that I was able to really realize this. I think is it on the next slide you have it? The kind of process of it.
These are the process shots.
Yeah. And they became so integral, like it almost, the thinking came in the process and the thing was the result of that. Like, so I was thinking about archaeology and excavation and like you said, medical kind of processes. And so these things became this idea of compression and layers, and it started from just these boxes that then you kind of open up and start to kind of reveal the inside, the cross section becoming a kind of edge to the inside of sorts, where all these things relate to. And the materials were always relating to bodies, like kind of soap or fake nails or lipstick, all things that you kind of add to yourself but then maybe exist longer than you. But I really enjoyed the process of it as well, of like kind of excavating the work from the making of it, peeling away these kind of layers of latex and cast elements too.
Is there some element in play there, like you don't necessarily have a hand in the final piece that comes out of this box? Obviously things slip and slide and maybe don't settle in a way that you want them to. Are you open to that process?
So, I mean, in a way, I think it's like a kind of back and forth between something that's like deeply controlled. Like I was making these really specific set size boxes that things were happening within. And maybe it was kind of similar to what I talk about with architecture. Like there's a framework that's very specific. And then there's a kind of fluidity that happens within that making process where things change. Like I had loads of little details that I was trying to add to these works, and a lot of them got absorbed into the material itself as I was pouring. So it's kind of it's kind of fossilized some of the objects too.
Well, here we can at least see a tooth embedded, so that made it through.
That one rotated, so it was in wood. It stayed.
Did someone lick this when it was on display?
Yeah, I watched somebody just stick their tongue out and lick it. I think there's I was really excited.
They do look very appealing, honestly.
They didn't taste appealing, but I was interested in that idea of like kind of sickly sweetness and something way more kind of mucky about the content of it, this idea of biting. And but yeah, I didn't think anybody would go to that extent. It's quite extra.
There's always one. I think another good example of your interest in the digestive process, the undiscovered underground and our internal operating system in a white wall setting, is an exhibition you did, Rot, in 2017 at the Baltic Center for Contemporary Art.
Yes.
Similar but different. Can you please describe the genesis of this particular exhibition?
So Rot was a kind of extension and exaggeration of this kind of gut feelings work that I had been thinking about, but it was much more kind of confronting the space of the gallery. So Baltic's this ex-flour mill that sits in Gateshead, that's kind of this really dramatic building, and the gallery was on level 2, so it's got this big glass face that kind of looks down on the city below. So I was really interested in like this idea of raising the floor of the space up while being able to physically see things, the city from above, if you know what I mean. So you're kind of thinking about the below while being above. And the title Rot is a term within the building trade relating to timber with 1 or 2 surfaces plain smooth, but also I think like just from saying it, it has the connotations of things breaking down or happening under the surface. So I was interested in this idea of kind of surface level or kind of being deeper than that. So again, it was going further with this idea of the cross section becoming this kind of massive curved platform. And and using this surface as a way to kind of reveal or combine. And the making methods using this were kind of really central to the content as well, kind of using these techniques of cutting and slicing or reconstituting of materials, but also the specific materials I use in this one were kind of like fish tank rocks or ash, or basically like human made impressions of kind of natural objects. So this kind of idea of kind of plasticiness. And then the things above that look like maybe bones or clouds, I wanted them to kind of clamp to the architecture and kind of trying to pull it into the succulence of the work. So it almost became like this kind of framework, but they were kind of above the surface, almost resisting the flatness. But to give some scale, I think, I mean, I don't know if there's any other pictures, but because it's quite hard to understand. I mean, for me, this picture looks like a model.
A little maquette. Well, here's a picture that's like an extrapolation of the white wall, which reveals like the structure that you're working within. It's like the bones, and then it's a window to the interior, which does provide a little scale.
Yeah, I think that hole was really important as well. The hole corresponded to that bone shape, but it was also doing another level of almost rendering the exhibition inside as an image before you saw the work, in the same way a kind of shop front does. It makes the contents inside an image before you then enter into that image or kind of see the full-bodied lumpenness of whatever's inside as well. So the whole kind of became twofold as this thing to kind of have as a way to kind of travel through the building, and the corresponding bone shape had kind of layers of things that would maybe be in a wall, but then there was then the kind of, you're confronted with the kind of a kind of cartoonified version of what's underneath as well.
Well, similar to gut feelings, it's a very complicated recipe of what you presented us with in terms of materiality. But I think, however, I think your packaging of those ideas and materials are seamless. I think the works can be very architectural, very minimal, but still carrying the same concepts, which actually brings us to Cenotaph, which was made for the Liverpool Biennial in 2018. This particular exhibition installation is on the Exchange Flags, which is the center here, and that's Town Hall in the background. And to my understanding, these were a series of sculptural pipe sections that delved into the city's history of the hollow underground architecture. Can you speak on that and why you were curious to bring that history above ground?
Yeah, I think so. Again, I don't live in Liverpool, but I'd spent a lot of time there through the biennial and for other reasons. And I was given this space for the biennial, for the 2018 Liverpool Biennial, and I was really I think it's one of the hardest works I've ever done, because I struggled with the space. It's the scale of it is like nothing else. It's used it's used in lots of films to impersonate New York. It's got like a real kind of like height to it, and there's like a real there's a real kind of grandeur to the space, which kind of reflects Liverpool's history of it being this port city that was kind of historically had the ambitions to be a kind of capital in a way, and so that scale is really daunting. And I think I was really struggling with this statue in the middle, with this kind of Nelson monument with prisoners and the kind of weight and problematics of that. And so my solution was to look to the kind of gaps between things, between the buildings. And that research led to going underneath the square itself, which is now a car park, but used to be a form of tunnels connecting the different buildings as a kind of form of communication. And so that research then took me to the Williamson tunnels, which are close by, which has this kind of amazing kind of history, but also rumors around it of like why Williamson was, he hired a massive team of people throughout his lifetime to dig these tunnels without
eccentric gentleman.
Yeah, that's one word for it. To dig them without really much explanation of why. Lots of them, like lots of entrances and exits are bricked up, or it was kind of this, lots of people said it was philanthropic, or to provide employment, or to prepare for like some kind of apocalypse where everybody could go under the ground. But I think the most logical solution that people have decided on is that it was a form of land reclamation. So he could dig to get more land above as well. So I was really interested in this idea of digging and tunnels, but also the kind of the aspect of like where that goes, the kind of the removal of that space as well. So I wanted to make this mold that implies a kind of cast form that never exists. So that relates to the title cenotaph, which implies a body buried elsewhere. So I'd hope that these kind of sculptural sections relate to kind of this puzzle of something that could maybe fit together, a kind of impossible configuration of sorts. And that also really came from looking at these other things of like shapes with maybe no with an origin but maybe no ending, because I was shown lots of archive photos of from the shipyards in Liverpool, where they, in the pattern rooms, where they make these kind of amazing wooden objects that would then be tested to go in the ship, to go in the kind of voids of the ships, to then have the metal parts of that made. So there's these amazing forms made in wood. So all of these things fed into the sculpture in a way that ended in these forms that, you know, I think for me a mold is this thing that it's got the potential. It's like the shell of a sculpture. It's the kind of discarded bit in a way as well. But you're never usually inside of that. So I was really interested in that kind of aspect of people being the public and being inside of that, having the physical interaction to be part of that.
Are there distinct elements you look for when surveying a site? Much as your work is about sculpture, again, emerging from the architecture of a space. I think for me, cenotaph is similar to homeostasis in that you're investigating the workings of a past site, a past life. I'm just curious of how you, I guess, begin that investigation.
Yeah, I think it comes from spending lots of time there. I don't know if it's a very interesting answer,
Fair.
But it's it's like, it feels like it's kind of digging in a way. And I think homeostasis was very different from cenotaph, this one, because of being given this space. I think there's a real difference in like thinking about this space and having it. I was kind of, I was as opposed to the space in Sharjah, that work came like kind of immediately from being in that space, whereas if you're kind of it's like being given a specific piece of paper of a specific size, you kind of go from there out. And so my aspect was to kind of go really wide, go massive, go kind of to the whole city to then bring it back in, I think.
Yeah, no, that's not a simple answer. I think that completely makes sense. And I know you mentioned, I had to look up what cenotaph meant when we first were discussing this, and you did say it's commemorating a people who once died, and specifically for like a war. And I know there were more than a few casualties probably in creating these tunnels. And I love this image specifically of the mold that you had created for this installation. And then there was that broken bone in the framework, which is, for me, that's very much the harking back to the people who once made our cities what they were, in a very literal sense.
Yeah, and I think I was thinking about figuration in a really weird way, going back to that Nelson monument in the middle. the kind of, you know, the element of kind of statutory in that kind of representation of the assumption of the kind of noble departed, and maybe like I was thinking about what history is missed out there, or what lives have been lost. And so yeah, it was a weighty work. It felt like there was a lot to pick apart, but also the fact that it was, you know, it was in such a public space, in a public square in the middle of a city. It was something it was going to be part of people's lives for a while the biennial was on. So there was kind of all those things that were kind of going through my head as well. And the work was really a response to like all of those aspects kind of coming together.
And right after this, you in 2019 created a work for the Yorkshire Sculpture Park entitled Slacker. And this focuses primarily on the body's repetition and utilizing machinery, I believe. And you're investigating the points of that intersection. The work conjures a physical reaction because of the slow gearing motion and the sticky sound of the skin-like band, which is made of silicone and polyurethanes. Is that correct, Polly?
Yeah, it was made of silicon mixed with kind of plastic detritus that was emulsified and mixed with the silicon.
And here's a process shot of you drawing that. And this band was made by drawing these shapes in, and it was slightly, we had discussed, in the fashion of a corpse bride drawing, and that it wasn't done in a unified manner because of the size of this. It had to be done in sections, correct?
Yeah, I think so. I won't talk about the kind of origins. There's so much that happened with this work that I felt I could talk about for ages, but I won't because I'm aware of timing. But the element of the exquisite corpse or surrealist, a kind of surrealist game, for those who don't know, where you draw a part and then turn it over and then pass it to the next person, and the next person draws a part until the paper's finished, and then you open it up and it becomes this kind of hybrid or monstrous body. And it wasn't the start of the work, but it became a really big part of it because of the scale of this rubbery inlay that I was making in the studio, that I had to fashion this kind of botched roller system for. That I couldn't see what I was doing at the time. So there was all these sections where I was drawing out kind of shapes of plasticine and then pouring the silicon with detritus into it and then kind of rolling it round again. So yeah, I only really saw it when it all came together. I was working with engineers who were helping to fabricate the roller system. So we had this like moment where it kind of both parts had to come together and work together. And yeah, it was a kind of leap of faith, but that was the moment where I felt like I kind of opened the drawing, if you know what I mean.
Right. And how long is the band again? I think you said it had to have a front and a back, therefore it doubled on itself.
Yeah, I think it's 20 meters in total, all around. I think.
Right. That's over 70 feet.
Maybe it's a bit less than that. The sculpture was 8 meters wide, and it kind of, the band went around it also, and obviously doubled because it goes back in itself. So
I think it's important to note that this was your first motorized kinetic sculpture, and it was almost necessary to do so to emphasize the suggestions of life and the churning and the regurgitation. And here you can see the digestion of the band, which I think makes you consider, is this a body or is this a thing? And I want to play this audio. It's about 40 seconds long, but I think it just gives people an idea of what it was to be in that space whilst it was moving. Brilliant. I love it.
Yeah, the static wasn't planned. So that noise, that sticky, plasticky noise is made by static because of the movement of the against the aluminium rollers, which wasn't, it was a thing that happened through me never making anything that moved before, but it became such an important aspect of the work because it kind of
gives a visceral response.
Yeah, it kind of makes the hairs on your arms or the back of your neck stand up, or kind of some people said they found it relaxing, like, you know, like white noise, but I found it it was quite physically, I feel like, yeah, I think about it and I think about static or something. It's yeah.
So it was a happy accident.
Yeah, it became a really important part of the work.
Love that. So most recently in 2021, you were invited by the Waterfronts Commission, England's Creative Coast, in partnership with the Delaware Pavilion, Bexhill on the Sea. And here we see part one of two commissions. In the interior, we can see Indifferent Deep, and in the background through the window, we're able to see the English Channel and invertebrate tunneling through the edge of the land. And it's rather different than the work situated in the town square, let's say. I've heard you discuss this before, but briefly, would you be able to speak about how you source some of this largely used material for this commission, specifically the plywood and the bricks? Because I know we had touched on it earlier, how now your work is very much you're making a conscious effort to reuse, and maybe put off certain items back to whence they came from after said commission or exhibition is over.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's maybe symptomatic of just making things to a scale as well. But this exhibition really had that at its center, kind of starting with the worm, the sculptural work outside that became quite a signifier for a lot of things I was thinking about, but about kind of, you know, a breakdown of edges, processing, you know, challenging a kind of material notion of kind of sharp-edged self-sufficiency, which also came from me talking and visiting the local brickworks, where again, they're kind of processing the land, turning it into brick, a kind of a response to that in one way felt quite freaky to see the kind of landscape being mined in that way, but also kind of necessity in building homes for people to live in. So I was thinking about that kind of splitness of those two elements, and me using things like that to make stuff. So we're kind of eating up, reconstituting and undoing. And I reuse things from before, like in the previous picture, you saw the white slices that were actually part of the Baltic from before. Those white slices at the top were from the big bony, bony things in Baltic. And so there was this element of that, but then, yeah, also the aggregate from the brickworks became part of the kind of floor. You can see the kind of lumps of it there. And the show happened like after, I was thinking about it before COVID, and then there was delays during COVID, and it happened after that. And so I also was donated all this MDF, which is a type of wood where it's kind of mulched up and mixed with resin. It's quite a horrible material in a way, that was kind of disused from a collapsed building project because of the pandemic. So I wanted to kind of confront that head on and use that as a kind of almost like a kind of skin of sorts to start with, and which afterwards then some of it went to build local studios, and some of it I've used in other works as well. So it's kind of got this weird onward life that I felt in relation to the thinking of the kind of wider idea of the exhibition, this idea of eating up the institution and making it become holy and porous. And that with the kind of the wood itself is this kind of mulched up wood that is kind of pressed flat and rationalized to become a building material again. So there were lots of repetitions of this thinking throughout the show. if that makes sense. I hope it does, without the context of everything else.
I think it does. And we'll see some more images that will assist in grounding that. But here we have a crustacean and hints of water movement, because based off of the environment you're in, again, English Channel out the window, Beck's Delaware sits on the channel. You were thinking about seabeds, not just here, but just in general, when creating this work. And I know, again, specifically due to the site, but this is something you had been investigating for quite some time now.
Yeah, and I the inclusion of the lobster was thinking about these kind of layers of things of the seabed and the kind of remnants of what belongs there, but also this idea of eating things up and spitting it back out again. I wanted to kind of cite that in a kind of idea of consumption as well as material use. And so I was looking at loads of like food related paintings or artworks, and all of the times the lobsters are cooked in like these kind of, old still lifes. And so this lobster specifically is like water jet cut from a purpley blue marble. So the fact that it's a living thing on the seabed, but it's also talking about kind of detritus, and the lobster feels also quite kind of an ancient creature as well. So there's this, I wanted to kind of include this idea of kind of layering in a way.
And here we have the outside commission, which again is made from the bricks that you had sourced, but also steel, zinc, canvas, sand, Jesmonite, paint. And I love this work. And I think it slightly goes back into how funny you are and how some of your works have some hilarity built through them. Here we can see invertebrate just snaking through the Delaware and slightly like eating it. In the foreground, you see this, I'm going to assume parent and child. And then on the background, you can see it snaking through the top level of the institution. And I just think it's so funny. And the fact that, again, I think it's similar to homeostasis and cenotaph, that these require assistance for you to pull off the balancing act of erecting these sculptures. And from working with these professionals, I wonder if you've taken a more logistical approach to site specific projects. And perhaps part two of that is, do you have any self-imposed restrictions when it comes to making work of this nature? I know like inside of a space, you have to worry if it's going to get through the door, and if not, how many sections you have to break it into. But these are outdoor works, and theoretically they can be as big as you wanted them to be. And I've heard this been said about your work, and I'm just going to say it again, that it's constantly in a process of continual change. The objects are in the midst of, or that you're highlighting the transformation of systems and structures, but also because they're outdoors, they're being weathered, they're being interacted with. I just thought you could talk about that for a sec.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess you're asking about the kind of logistics, but also the changing element of it as well. I think there's I don't know about it kind of broadly speaking, but specifically with this work, the modularity was really important. So the fact that it, this was a form here, but it could also, each element could almost twist and change. So in that way, it felt quite alive or kind of flexible of sorts. The idea, I kind of like the idea of it eating this institution and then going somewhere else and eating something else, and kind of building this almost boar sample of different places. But also, there was, with this work, there was the kind of practical consideration of how it breaks down literally as well. So that there was like the sandbag elements were based on kind of flood defense techniques, but could also be emptied out again, so the material goes back to its kind of origins. And I think so those were kind of the concerns or kind of limitations that I had with this work in particularly. Yeah.
Well, your work does have this through line of environmental change, biological degradation, things that crumble, things that will fail us, bodies, architecture, material even. But you turn these elements into objects that beam with humor and refashion them into like these dynamic interactions that look simple, but they're thoughtful in their history and in their research and their intention. And that brings us to more recently, in 2022, you were invited to Esch in Luxembourg, and you created this floppy water wheel entitled Sump. And again, you're looking at your surrounding environment, and the relationship of this specific area was the town to where this was installed. There's a local steel mill and a school and housing. And just from visiting your studio, I know with regards to that, you were also thinking about this ancient medieval philosophy of rota fortuna, the wheel of fortune, where the wheel is the goddess Fortuna who spins it at random, changing the position of those who are on the wheel. So some suffer misfortune, some gain wealth and riches. So you're taking those elements and then creating this amazing work.
Yeah, I think
talking about the energy of water that was in that surrounding area.
Yeah,
the
making of this work was actually really important as well in relation to what you're saying here, because it was using steamed wood, and so in relation to that kind of aspect of you know, the wheel of fortune or rota fortuna, and kind of I wanted the water wheel to go from this rigid thing that could kind of hold its shape and produce energy and movement, and to kind of flop and become kind of limp and soften and almost feel more human. And so that element of the steam bending is like a furniture technique that obviously is used to make kind of armrests of chairs and stuff. But on a massive level, it kind of involves like quite kind of, you know, a lot of clamps and
right.
weight and kind of leaning into it. And so I really enjoyed that element of like it kind of curving to the curve of my body as well, and that being a kind of central part of the look of the water wheel, but also kind of the action that got it to that point, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And so everyone knows, these are more or less all the clamps in your studio featured in this photo.
In the whole of London.
Whole of London. This was your first attempt, like you said. So you found it very simple, that learning process, and being able to like make this usually stiff object very malleable, and the fact that you just had to put your weight into it and just clamp it essentially.
Yeah, well, I mean, it wasn't not totally simple, but it's like this kind of oozy manic process of things kind of slipping and sliding and going out of your control, but then like something like wood that's usually so rigid becoming kind of damp and wobbly again, but then the kind of clamping and the gluing and the holding then suddenly makes it a kind of rigid wobbly structure. So yeah, I think it was just a really important part of the process.
Here's the final result. I love this photo, but I'm biased. And more exciting and recent news that you have been given the green light for your permanent installation. And I was hoping you can talk to us about the labor of love that is lip sync at Steamhouse.
Yep, so I've got 2 upcoming projects. One is Lip Sync at Steamhouse, and the other is a project in London in the Artist Garden at Temple, which is above Temple Tube Station. And Lip Sync I've got photos of because it's about to be installed. Temple will be installed in July, so it's not at that point yet. But yeah, Lip Sync kind of draws on kind of some of the other works we've talked about, this idea of material kind of softening and becoming malleable, or looking like it's becoming malleable. And yeah, it's going to be installed on Tuesday next week. It's come from it's a very different work because it's permanent, and there's a lot of, I've never done a permanent work before, so it's been a really amazing kind of process to learn the difference in that as well, what changes when something needs to last or stay a particular way. But it's going to be in Birmingham, outside Birmingham City University's building called Steam House, which has lots of production spaces and workshops. And so with it, it's based on lots of workshops I've done with the local primary school and with university students in Birmingham, where we did kind of big exquisite corpse drawings, talking about kind of what it means to be a body in relation to kind of technological devices, and extending your body outwards or multiple bodies, but also thinking about the kind of hardware and software that augments our bodies. So yeah, I think I was kind of trying to think. The history of the building relates to, it used to be a rubber and cycle factory. So that became a real starting point, because I immediately kind of exaggerated that in my mind to be something that's about animation and a kind of rubbery cartooniness. So I hope the work really reflects that in it. But yeah, I mean, I should have pictures of things happening with it next week. This is it in its production stages.
This is something happening, yeah.
Yeah, but obviously for this, I've not been making it myself because my welding isn't to this standard. So I've been working with the White Wall Company, who have been kind of, yeah, creating this impossible puzzle of wobbly parts with me. So each individual part is separate, that then fits together, and they're all taken from an amalgamation of the drawings that we did with the primary school and students in Birmingham. But it's all together now.
Lovely, and congratulations on that. I know that's been a work in process for quite some time.
It's been quite an amazing process to see how many voices are involved to get a work to somewhere. It's really difficult, but exciting.
Well, that being said, we do have great opportunity to look at some of these questions that people have been sending us. And I would like to answer some of these while we still have time. Here's a question with regards to one of the earlier works we were discussing regarding latex. This could either be for blister or RGB. Could you talk about the fine line of inflation and deflation in your work? What do you want these concepts to contain?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think a lot of the time my works are, yeah, it's about inflation, but with the potential for deflation or bursting. And so maybe this sounds really obvious, but for me, I guess it also relates to like the recent works that move or have kinetics in this kind of potential. There's like potential for a breath, or for me, I also think about like the kind of, it sounds a bit morbid, but it's like a kind of a kind of existence or non-existence. The minute something pops or deflates, it goes from being something in the round to being something flattened. I'm just looking at, I'm kind of relating this to another question that I can see, relating to the idea of cartoon imagery. And it really relates because I talk about cartoons a lot as an influence in my works. And I think the cartoon has this kind of same kind of airy quality, like cartoons exist on this plane where they bounce back from death, or they like fall off a cliff and flatten and then suddenly become inflated again. And the kind of sounds or motions or kind of stretch and pull that happen in cartoons kind of create this illusion that something's kind of pain doesn't happen, or like death is reversible. And I think I'd hope that some of my works kind of through some of those actions or imagery kind of approach those ideas as well as like I use the film Who Framed Roger Rabbit as an example because it does it better than I can say, because
Right.
the human actors acting alongside the cartoons feel so kind of fragile and delicate. And I guess I'm kind of really interested in that, kind of doing that as a viewer, or being that as the artist, and making these works that kind of feel like they're kind of gravity defying or death defying, or kind of approach that subject matter. So I hope that kind of answers two questions in one, because they relate so much for me about this idea of, inflation and deflation, like something very small that can have a big effect that could maybe be initially quite humorous, but actually feels really serious in a way as well, and how those two things are kind of so close together.
I can't help but think with regards to your answer of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and at the end, spoiler alert for some people, Judge Doom, the human, is actually a tune. And they find out because he gets flattened and then he inflates himself. So, in speaking with regards to that.
Exactly.
We have another good question. Can you speak to some of your influences, whether they are other artists? We already know that it is internal and external functions as well. Is there anyone that you look towards or think of as a base inspiration for you making work?
I always answer this question so badly because there's so many, and also there's never kind of one artist that I completely go to, but I think the scale of Phillip Edward is somebody that kind of comes back into my work a lot. Somebody mentioned Louise Bourgeois, of course. People like Niki de Saint-Phal, who I think there's an element of kind of oh god, I'm having a mind blank now. Richard Deacon, or I guess they become this kind of mix of influences that then I kind of try to pull into my experience or my life or my way of maybe kind of thinking or working as well. But then there's also, like, my contemporaries, my friends, the artists that are, exhibiting right now, people like Katrina Palmer, or Mika Rottenberg, who I think kind of really push or question or address the notion of sculpture in such a brilliant way. But yeah, those are all the people that are coming into my head, but there's so many more.
Oh, that's great. I appreciate you sharing that, Holly, honestly. And I think we have maybe time for one more question. Can you tell us more about the London Commission opening in July?
Yeah, sure. So it's revisiting the use of pipe work. It's currently, I've got a test of it in my studio right now, if you want to have a little sneak peek there. It's using cast fenders and stainless steel ducting, but addressing the site as more of a kind of giant drawing, thinking about it's kind of influenced by ancient depictions of water and the drawing of water. It's positioned right next to the Thames River and the kind of busy roads of London. So it's a lot about movement and currents and sound currents, wave currents, and kind of microscopic depictions of water. Temple as a word is obviously has religious connotations or anatomical connotations, but is also the meaning of a tool used in weaving to keep the edges in line. So I'm really working with that and trying to kind of weave the space in a sense. That's the best kind of verbal description I can do.
That was great. I look forward to seeing it.
Thank you.
Well, Holly, I want to thank you so much for your time. Honestly, I bet you're going to go right back to work in the studio after we hang up here. And I wish you the best of luck with what you're working on. And I look forward to seeing you in London or stateside.
No, thank you so much for your time, and thank you to everybody else for tuning in. And yeah, thank you for having me.
Bye, Holly.
Bye.